I poured nights into the company. Dad gave the keys to my brother. I left with a suitcase and hollow pride. Weeks later the news showed our shuttered warehouse. Hand on a letter at the curb, I almost turned back. Then. My name is Emily Carter. For most of my adult life I thought what I was building was less about money and more about legacy. Not my dad's legacy exactly, but a thing I could hand to my kids and say, we did this. The company started as a small family business, sure, but by the time I'd put in the blood, grit, and nights without sleep, it was my project more than anyone else's. I believed in it. I believed in a better version of our family. I believed, foolishly, that hard work led to respect. That belief died slow and loud the day my father, Mark, called a family meeting and handed the keys, literally and figuratively, to my younger brother, Michael. Everyone sat at our old scarred conference table in the downtown office where I had once slept over a spreadsheet and a styrofoam cup of cold coffee. Dad's face looked small in the fluorescent light. My chest felt like a fist. Let me rewind a bit so this reads like the fuller mess it was. Dad started Carter Supply Company in the late 80s. It was a gritty thing, a two-truck operation hauling hardware to independent stores around our region. I grew up in the warehouse. The smell of sawdust, the constancy of forklifts, the small rituals that become a person if you're raised inside them. When Dad's knee gave out, he leaned on me more than I expected. I was 26 when he handed me the title of operations manager. I was 28 when I redesigned the route logistics and renegotiated supplier contracts that turned a marginal margin into something stable. I was 30 when I convinced a regional retailer to do a multi-year commitment that doubled our revenue. I did the hard, unglamorous work other people call grunt work. Inventory reconciliation at 2 a.m., coaxing failing employees into competence, flying to Asia to meet a supplier who didn't trust emails. All of this reads, in a CV, like competence. To me it read like ownership. I stayed. I believed in this company the way other people believe in churches. I missed birthdays and anniversaries because of shipments and product recalls. I learned to negotiate with corporate buyers in the morning and seal my child's lunchboxes at night. I remember having a small private conversation with Dad after the third bumper week in a row where I'd skipped dinner at home. I said, I want this to be our family for a long time. I want to anchor it. He nodded and said, I know you do, Em. I see you. Then he started bringing Michael into small things. Michael is charismatic in a way I never was. He's a salesman by birth, easy laugh, hungry smile, the kind of charm that lubricates awkward rooms. He left town when he was 21 and rode corporate sales gigs around the country for a decade. He'd pop back for holidays, tell stories, charm the neighbors, and then leave again. He never stuck with it because adventure suited him, until one slow winter when Dad, maybe lonely, maybe nostalgic, started complaining that Michael needed to be around. Dad would say, he's got the gift of gab, and I would say, he also has a tendency to vanish for months. The change accelerated faster than I could process. Dad started asking Michael to sit in on meetings, just to learn the ropes. Michael would show up, wear a blazer he didn't need, smile at vendors, and had a way of making tough people laugh. Dad's eyes would mist in these moments, like he was watching someone he'd once been. It felt like a romance I couldn't get into. Nostalgia for who Michael might be rather than who he was. I tried not to read the lines with a jealous mind. After all, families are messy and affection is not a ledger. But business is a ledger. The first real sign that the ledger was being rewritten was when Dad started talking publicly about passing the torch. He mentioned it at the holiday party with a roundness in his voice that made my mouth dry. He said, Michael's back and I think it's time to set him up. I laughed politely because what else was there to do at a family party? But later that week he called me into his small, cluttered office and slid a manila folder across the desk. It was the plan for succession, and the part that mattered most was a line that said, in careful handwriting, CEO, Michael Carter. There was a beat where I thought he'd say it was a joke. He didn't. He said, with the weird earnestness of a man finally fulfilling a fantasy, I want him to have the company in his name, Em. He deserves a chance to run it. My response, a messy mix of anger and hurt, came out like an instruction from a wounded animal. You want to put it in his name? After I spent years turning this thing from a local delivery operation into a regional supplier. He looked down like a man embarrassed to be holding a bone he'd thrown elsewhere. You've done good work, he said. But Michael has different skills. He's good with people. He'll take us places. That sentence was a wedge. I tried to make the case for continuity. The practical reasons, the contractual protections, the reality that handing over a company needs planning more than sentiment. I listed everything I'd done, everything I'd built. Dad's reply was simple, and not cruel in tone, but devastating in effect. This is my decision. You'll have a role as head of operations. You'll report to him. We'll make this transition. Report to him. The words pinched in my throat. Head of operations was a title that could mean anything or nothing, depending on the person sitting in the corner office. I accepted the title because I didn't want to burn bridges. I stayed because I'd poured my life into these walls and because I thought the company was bigger than my ego. At the time the compromise felt adult. I rationalized. The kids and I stayed. I continued to do the work, but the moral center, the thing that used to align with me, shifted. The first months under Michael were a series of small injuries. He rewrote the sales calls with an oversimplified optimism that clashed with supply chains. He pivoted clients with a seat-of-the-pants energy that delighted some and alarmed others. He was brilliant at getting people in a room to say yes. But deals are only as good as the follow-through. Contracts would be promised that our back end simply could not deliver. Orders ballooned. Freight costs spiked. Our margins compressed. I raised concerns, careful memos, 1:1 talks, and was met with the kind of dismissal that sounds like confidence. "We can absorb it," he'd say. "Trust me." Dad would listen, then say he believed in Michael's instincts. He began to attend events where Michael could shine. Ribbon cuttings, philanthropic galas, Chamber of Commerce breakfasts. He'd sit back and watch his son tell a story, and his chest would swell like a man who had won a medal. When I raised the financial alarms in the boardroom, inventories mismatched, cash flow tightening, Dad placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Give him some time." That line is still the slowest knife I can name. Time became a shortfall. Within 18 months, the cracks showed. Clients who once loved our reliability grew weary. A few cancelled multi-year commitments. The banker stopped returning our cheerful emails and asked for collateral. We missed a payroll once, and the payroll clerk sobbed in the supply closet because rent was due and a landlord was not a corporate problem. There were nights when I'd stay after everyone left, leaning my head on the keyboard, and think about the first pallet we'd shipped as a family business and how fragile the thing was. I started to do a balancing act between the person who knew how to save a company and the person who had been asked to help a kid made CEO by a father's misplaced generosity. Then came the decision that finally split my life into before and after. Dad, perhaps blinded by goodwill or the rose-colored memory of the past, decided to transfer the company's majority shares to Michael. He kept a minority stake and kept a ceremonial title as founder. They brought in a corporate attorney and signed papers in the conference room I'd cleaned and painted and sometimes slept in. The signatures were swift. My name did not appear on the transfer because, apparently, a daughter who ran operations did not need ownership to the extent she thought. I felt like I'd been pickpocketed of the future. I left that day and locked the office door from the outside and went home and packed a bag. I told few people I was leaving. I told fewer that I wasn't coming back to the office to work. "I need to sleep," I said to Dad and to myself. The kids needed me to be present, and I was tired of being a manager without agency. I left to take my savings, to clear my head, to figure out what integrity would look like if I wasn't trapped in a building that honored a different son. I started a small consulting practice, helping regional suppliers optimize logistics. It was quieter. It was lucrative enough. It was also, truthfully, a survival strategy for my dignity. I stopped checking the company email obsessively. I told myself I was freeing my heart by leaving a place where it had been flattened. Then, 6 months after my exit, a video hit my feeds. A local news piece about Carter Supply Company. It was the sort of thing where the camera pans over the faded logo on a warehouse and a perfectly neutral reporter explains leadership transition. The clip was 2 minutes long, and in it were 3 images that imprinted on me with the force of a revelation. 1. My father standing on the front steps in his cardigan, looking like someone who /U 2019D lost a map. 2. Michael in the showroom, hands gesturing, voice rising, looking swallowed by the responsibility he'd been given. And 3. A line in the reporter's script that made my knees go hollow. "Creditors are calling," he said, "and the company is reportedly struggling to meet payroll." But the moment that will always live in my mind was the interview with Dad 20 seconds later. He was asked why, if he'd given the company to his son, he didn't step in to bail him out. The camera closed on his face in a way that made the soft lines hard. He answered like a man who had rehearsed detachment. "Michael wanted to run it on his own. I have to let him. I can't keep rescuing him. He needs to learn. Let him learn. Let him fail." The phrase landed like a stone in a bowl. Watching the clip, it felt like betrayal reversed. The old man who had chosen sentiment over prudence now choosing principle over people when the principle would mean watching his son suffer. In the video, Dad looked at Michael almost with a clinical distance, a mixture of pride and disgust that read as, "I gave you the keys. Now I will let you hang with your choices." The same hands that had once handed me responsibility without ownership were now refusing to help the son they had chosen. The company crumpled faster than I expected. Vendors tightened terms. A key supplier demanded payment up front. One of our biggest clients, the regional retailer I'd landed years ago, gave us a 60-day notice. The accountant called me, whispering the kind of numbers that make your stomach drop. I started receiving panic texts from old employees and, in one, an audio note of someone crying about how their rent was due and how the boss had abandoned them. That's when the story mutated from personal betrayal into a communal wound. This was not just a failed succession. This was people's livelihoods wavering in the wind. Do I feel a rush of vindication when the house of cards collapses? If you read that and expect a triumphant, "I told you so, clap, you don't know me." My response was complicated. Grief, not schadenfreude. I had walked away because I felt disrespected and invisible, and the collapse felt like watching a child injure himself because a parent wouldn't intervene. I resented Dad for the choices he made, and I resented Michael for not listening and for being seduced by the show. But the people who truly made me sick with worry were the employees who had trusted us with mortgages and kids and bills. A few people asked me, publicly and privately, why I didn't step in. Why would I leave a company and not come back when it was hemorrhaging? Why would I watch from the sidelines when I had the experience to steady it? The short answer is boundaries. The longer answer is messy. When a parent chooses one child over another in a financial and emotional way, the dynamic that forms is poisonous. Dad's decision was not just to hand Michael the company. It was to re-legitimize a pattern of favoritism. I didn't want to be the person who worked herself into a role where her authority would be continually undermined by the man who refused to see the damage his choices made. Returning to save the company would have required me to sign a moral surrender, accept a hierarchy that placed me under the son we both loved while Dad pretended the transfer was a sound decision. I'd been asked to be humble to the point where my competence was erased. That's not a hole you fill with a heroic return. At least it wasn't one I wanted to fill. So I watched the video and felt my body calibrate toward a decision I'd already made. I would not rescue them on their terms. I offered, privately, to broker a loan or to consult with a clear scope and compensation. I told them I would help on an advisory basis but not step back into a chain of command where my voice would be ceremonial. Michael declined. Dad declined. They wanted either pride or a miracle. I offered data and hours. They wanted bloodless faith. I refused our old bargain. Watching them flounder from the outside was horrible. There were texts from old warehouse guys asking if I could just call a supplier. I did call some favors. Not to save the company's soul but to keep payroll for a handful of people for a narrow window. A few employees wrote to thank me privately. But I could not re-enter the machine in the way they needed. That would have been capitulation. The company closed its doors a year after Dad's transfer. There were creditor negotiations, an auction for assets, and a scattering of good people finding work elsewhere slowly and painfully. Michael moved to another state and did some consulting until his savings dwindled. Dad's health declined under the weight of regret. I found him sitting in the front porch swing, a man who looked like he'd been edited down. I had complicated feelings. I grieved what we lost together, I resented what we were, and I felt the small relief of not having to negotiate my dignity under someone else's whim. People called me cruel for not returning. Some said I should have been bigger, more forgiving. Others said I had every right to make a clean exit. My truth is this. I left because I needed to be whole. I chose to build something separate and sustainable from the wreckage of favoritism. I tried to help on my terms, paying out of pocket for certain ex-employees' immediate needs, quietly connecting a few with gigs, and donating to a small charity that supported displaced workers. Those acts felt like the only ones I could own without losing myself. There's a lesser-known aftermath that no one predicts when a family business collapses. The family itself phrase. Family gatherings grew awkward. Conversations stalled at a brittle, "How are you?" instead of the warm body questions we used to have. Some relatives took Dad's side. The narrative that Michael was given a shot persisted, as if giving someone a company absolves you of the obligation to teach them how to run it. Some relatives blamed me for leaving without fighting harder. It's messy and petty and human. A year and a half later, what I've built for myself is not a company of forklifts and pallets but a quieter web of trust. Consulting clients who respect boundaries, a small real estate investment that serves as a nest egg, and Saturday mornings where I volunteer with a non-profit that helps people learn trade skills. I sleep more soundly. I play more with my kids without a freight set of numbers pressed to my skull. I made space in my life for other things I'd been too busy to love. Do I wish Dad had listened to me? Of course. Do I wish Michael had taken mentorship instead of speed? Yes. Do I regret walking away? Sometimes, in the soft hours, I miss a version of myself that believed hard work always equals rightful reward. But regret is different than unwillingness. I am unwilling to live my life bending into a shape someone else wrote for me because he loved a son that fit a nostalgic mold better. If you are a person who has built something and feels invisible when someone else is handed a prize you labored for, my advice is blunt and boring. Name the harm, make a plan, and protect your dignity. There is nothing heroic about being ground into a role that erases you. That doesn't mean you have to burn every bridge. It means you have to decide what you will accept as a person and what you will not surrender to nostalgia or familial fantasy. I still go past the shuttered warehouse sometimes. The neighborhood has a thrift store where our old logo used to be. Kids ride bikes past the loading dock. I stop, sometimes, and I let myself mourn the way things could have been if decisions had been rational instead of romantic. Then I go home, where my kids wait with small hands and louder laughter, and that sound is a better ledger than any stock certificate.